Wagwan. Good morning, good night, welcome back, and if you're listening for the first time, welcome to episode 9 of The Real Situation, where we give you a taste of Jamaican politics. I'm your host, Melanie Byfield, and in this series, we're focusing on Jamaica's journey to becoming a republic. After 62 years, independent Jamaica is once again on the road to transitioning from a constitutional monarchy to a constitutional republic. Why? Because the journey not done. Jamaica's executive is an English king. The second schedule of the Jamaica in parentheses Constitution Ordering Council 1962, which granted Jamaica independence and which represents the highest law of the land, is a colonial document, and Jamaica's highest court of appeal is the Privy Council in London. This is the first of 3 phases of constitutional reform, and right now we're in phase 1, focusing on changes to the deeply entrenched provisions of the Constitution. What does that involve? There is amending the Constitution and Jamaicanizing it into a constitution by the people for the people, becoming the Constitution of Jamaica. There's also the removal of the monarchy, that is King Charles III, as head of state, replacing him with a proposed non-executive president and transforming Jamaica from a constitutional monarchy to a constitutional republic. Since the proposed amendments are deeply entrenched, the Constitution requires a referendum to be held for the people of Jamaica to say yes or no to the bill housing those proposed amendments, which has to pass 2/3 majority in both houses with a vote of at least 1 member of the opposition. The 15-member Constitutional Reform Committee that was established in March 2023 held their final meeting on April 24, 2024, and they submitted a report in May of this year, which were recommendations that have now been tabled in Parliament as a ministry paper. Mark Golding, the opposition leader, prepared a document outlining the issues that party doesn't agree with, the biggest one being the final Court of Appeal. And the argument is that Jamaica won't be fully independent while retaining the Privy Council. The Caribbean Court of Justice is actually the strongest contender to replace the Privy Council on the basis that Jamaica is a member of CARICOM and was instrumental in establishing the court and has invested financially in its creation. We're going to take a brief detour to talk about the financing of the Caribbean Court of Justice. This information actually came from the CCJ's website. And this is what it says. Concerns have been expressed that the judges of the court would be paid by governments which can exert decisive informal pressure on them to deliver judgments favourable to this or that government. In order to preempt this eventuality and fund the Caribbean Court of Justice in perpetuity, a trust fund of $100 million US was established so as to enable the expenditures of the court to be financed by income from the fund. In this way, the expenditures of the court, including the remuneration of the judges, is not dependent on the disposition of governments. As a consequence, the CCJ is the only integration court of its kind, financially independent of the largesses of governments, the largesse of governments, and free from their administrative control. Jamaica's contribution was actually $27 million. But that basically was what Bruce Golding spoke about in his July 30 reasoning. How the funding of the court became an issue and how there wasn't much confidence in having to rely on governments to make regular payments to support the court. But the trust fund idea gave, much more confidence in the financial stability and independence of the judges of the court. In episode 7, we looked at the making of the Constitution, We took a ride through the 138 sections of the final 1962 Constitution in episode 8. And today we're going to look at some of the proposed changes by the CRC to the Constitution. There's already been, I believe, 2 amendments to the Constitution, 2 very big ones though. The Charter of Fundamental Rights and Freedoms, that was April 7, 2011, and on July 19, 2024, Section 61 of the Constitution was amended to provide new words of enactment. It's cited as the Constitution, in parentheses, Amendment of Section 61, Act 2024. And it basically is an act to amend Section 61 of the Constitution of Jamaica to provide for new words of enactment. So what we're actually going to do right now is scoot to the end of the Act, and I'd like to read a piece of the Memorandum of Objects and Reasons by Minister of Legal and Constitutional Affairs Marlene Byfield. So it reads as follows, and I'm not reading its entirety, I'm reading some of it, right? The words of enactment specified in Section 61 of the Constitution of Jamaica include references to the Queen. A decision has been taken to amend the text of Section 61 of the Constitution of Jamaica to provide for words of enactment that are more appropriate for Jamaica. That decision constitutes the first legislative step in a proposed series of amendments intended to give effect to a constitution enacted by the Parliament of Jamaica and approved by the people of Jamaica. This bill seeks to give effect to that decision. Now, I just feel like this is a very great and meaningful part of this journey. Basically, the Act reads, whereas Section 61 of the Constitution of Jamaica provides the words of enactment for every bill enacted by Parliament, and whereas those words of enactment in each case begin with the words, be it enacted by the Queen's most excellent Majesty, and whereas it is desirable to amend Section 61 of the Constitution of Jamaica to provide for words of enactment that authenticate acts of Parliament and enactments of the Parliament empowered by the people of Jamaica. So basically, here's what it did. Here's the gist of what was changed. And I'm going to read you the before and kind of after certain parts of Section 61. So, before, it said in every bill presented to the Governor-General, the words of enactment shall read as follows: be it enacted by the Queen's most excellent Majesty, by and with the advice and consent of the Senate and House of Representatives of Jamaica. That's now been changed. And now what it says is, in every bill presented to Parliament, the words of enactment shall be as follows: be it enacted by the Parliament of Jamaica, by and with the advice and consent of the Senate and House of Representatives of Jamaica. Much better, not true? All right, so what's been going on this week? August 14, in the Jamaica Gleaner, there was an article entitled Entrenching Local Government in the Constitution, and it was by Frank Phipps, KC, OJ. And I'm going to read you 2 quotes from that article. It was as follows. Any consideration for constitutional reform must include the status of local government. And then the next quote is, this is the first place for the people to be heard in their cry for equal rights and justice on the journey for full independence. I may be missing something here, but I don't get this one. I don't understand the necessity. I mean, if you have any thoughts on that, let me know. Next, August 12, in the Jamaica Gleaner, there was an article, it's an editorial, and the title is I Need Government Stand on CCJ. And it says that it's a position that is strongly supported by the newspaper, the Jamaica Gleaner. So it makes quite a few points. The first point is, it says the government's position on the CCJ is critical to Jamaica's stalled constitutional reform process. This, however, is a question to which the Andrew Holness administration has provided no clear answer, despite its promise nearly a year ago, finally, to do so in short order. It goes on to say that there's an absence of trust between the parties, and basically, I'm going to summarise what it says. Basically, what they're saying is they feel like the PNP don't want to go ahead and remove the monarchy and delay removal from the Privy Council because they feel like the JLP may not go through with that agreement. Okay, it actually goes on to say in the last opinion poll on the CCJ, it showed that 6 in 10 Jamaicans were in favour of joining the court, which is, obviously, a majority of those people who were polled. And then there's also the observation by, again, Bruce Golding, former JLP leader and former Prime Minister. We're going to touch on that shortly. In what was entitled A Reasoning with Mr Orette Bruce Golding about reform of the Jamaica Constitution and De-Linking from the British Monarchy. That was the title of the reasoning I referenced, and it was at UWI, and it was on July 30, University of West Indies. Sorry, UWI. Okay, so this article goes on to say that neither a supermajority or a referendum is needed to remove the Privy Council, right, as Jamaica's final court. There was an attempt to do this previously by the PNP administration, and it wasn't successful because basically there has to be a court in place that is superior to Jamaica's existing Court of Appeal. If you want to move away from the Privy Council, you got to move to something, right? Right. So the article kind of finishes up saying the PNP has staked out its position. We know where they stand. Okay, so moving on. Both the Gleaner and the Observer ran articles about this reasoning with Bruce Golding, which was a really good reasoning. It was very, very good. So the first article is by the Observer. It was pretty lengthy, and it's called I Respectfully Disagree. Bruce Golding slams decision to reject impeachment provisions in new constitution. It was written by Dashan Hendricks. So the article refers to Part 6, Section 3 of the CRC report on the transition to the Republic of Jamaica and other matters. That's the title of the report. And it recommended that there should be no inclusion of an impeachment process in the reformed constitution. And the author said he reviewed, the author is referencing how Bruce Golding reviewed that decision with, and I quote, with some dismay, right? Given that there was an agreement between the government and the opposition in the past to have impeachment included as a measure to hold parliamentarians accountable for their actions while in office. And Mr Golding went on to say, if it is good enough for our judges and good enough for our Auditor General and good enough for our Director of Public Prosecutions, why is it not good enough for certain other public officials? He went on to say that it was also part of the JLP manifesto in 2007, that he tabled a bill in 2011 to give effect to impeachment provisions, and he also added that it was in the JLP manifesto of 2011 as a work in progress, and in 2020 it was in the JLP manifesto as one of several issues that would have been, there would have needed to have been a wide-scale consultation with the Jamaican people on. He also reminded the audience that Mark Golding had actually tabled a bill. The opposition leader, Mark Golding, tabled a Constitution Amendment Impeachment Act in 2021, reinforcing the fact that, you know, there was agreement on this subject. The article also goes on to say that this is Bruce Golding's point. The CRC reasoned in its report that one of the grounds on which it rejected the idea of impeachment provisions in the Constitution is because it's dealing with what is essentially a legal matter through a political process, as most impeachable offences are criminal in nature and properly triable in courts. But he says, and this is Bruce Golding, quote, and I quote, "I respectfully disagree." He said that after reading the report and the reason for the omission of the impeachment provision, he said the proposals that were put forward in 1995 were never conceived as a substitute for criminal prosecution. He stated that the Joint Select Committee of 1995 did recommend and did include as a ground for impeachment corruption or misappropriation of public funds or property. So it would definitely fall within the concerns that this new committee had expressed. He goes on to say, you can have a public official who misconducts himself or herself in a particular way, but it's not a crime. But you certainly don't want that person continuing in public office. He went on to add, I have disappointment that the political maturity that I thought was evolving, where partisan political interest in certain situations could be subordinated to the national interest. I'm deeply disappointed that evolution hasn't materialized. We are as tribalistic as we ever were. It's only that we no longer trade bullets, instead trade insults. We are adverse to finding common ground, yet he argued that it is possible to insulate the impeachment procedure from partisan politics. And while it's true that impeachment in most circumstances where those provisions exist is a legislative matter conducted within the legislature, it doesn't have to be, he stated. And he explained that the Joint Select Committee of 95 had actually recommended a two-stage process for impeachment, by number one, recommending impeachment coming from a parliamentary committee, and then referring it to an independent tribunal for a hearing to be conducted and a decision to be made. Basically, Marlene, and then the article goes on to talk about Marlene Malahoo Fort's response, which was basically that she said, speaking directly about the matter, she said she recognises and shares the concern for finding a mechanism that is workable, practical, devoid of the kind of spectacle that we are prone to gravitate towards to hold our officials to account in a meaningful way. So the door is not closed. The next article was actually from the Gleaner, and it's called Impeachment for Legislators, Other Officials. And I'm going to quote, they've quoted Mr Golding in the article as follows. The Constitutional Amendment Bill I tabled in 2011 was for the impeachment not only of legislators, but other designated public officials. The clarification is important. Bruce Golding's reasoning, it's the second one of that nature. The first one was by P.J. Patterson, that is. That took place on June 5th, same place, Huey. This reasoning with Bruce Golding was jam-packed with information, and I really would urge you to listen to it. I can't fit all of what he addressed in this episode, basically. It's on YouTube. It lasted about 3.5 hours. I mean, don't watch that. It was, don't worry about that. It was, like I say, packed with information. Only for first-hand knowledge, between him and PJ. I mean, in the 60s, PJ was starting his political career, and Golding was in high school. Not forgetting this, his father was the first Speaker of the House of Independent Jamaica, so he's from a very strong political background, So one thing that was central, I noticed, in his reasoning was consensus, right? General agreement, consensus. He described the Constitution as chains and shackles, and therefore Constitution is critical. And he said, I'm going to refer to that several more times before I sit down. He talked about consensus in relation to political tribalism, comparing the two parties to two chickens bred for cockfight. But how no one came anywhere close to Michael Manley and Edward Seaga, who were not only bitter rivals, they were arch enemies. Golding's words. Right? And he described that period as the most politically polarized in our history. But yet, he said, they found it possible to find consensus at King's House, despite their hostility, and established the Electoral Advisory Committee in 1979, and that was actually later replaced by the Electoral Commission of Jamaica. He actually showed a picture of the two man them signing the legislation, and he described it as consensus being formalized. And then he re-emphasized consensus is not beyond us. And how? And he's saying how he hasn't given up on reasonableness, because if Manley and Seaga can do it, anyone can do it. All you got to do is give a little one more time. On the subject of the CCJ, Mr Golding confirmed that the court wasn't such a sticking point in those 1995 negotiations, and how actually Mr Seaga had suggested that since the CCJ was a new court, that they wait about 10 years and make an assessment then. I'm going to give you a brief history of the court, right? This is actually outlined on their website, on the court's website. But it basically went from a meeting of the West Indian governors in 1947. This is the period that this spanned, right, to the inauguration of the court in 2005. At present, the court receives its appellate jurisdiction from Barbados, the countries that utilize the court's appellate jurisdiction: Barbados, Belize, Dominica, Guyana, and in 2022, St. Lucia became the 5th Caribbean nation to move its final Court of Appeal away from the Privy Council to the CCJ. Okay, so then Mr. Golding also referred to what was his biggest concern, which was this 1833 Act, right? The Privy Council Act. And basically what he's saying is, because it's an act of Parliament, it can be changed at any time without consulting the government of Jamaica, basically. And that could, a move like that would then bar Jamaica from utilizing the Privy Council, right? I think we talked about that before. He says our own court, not an idea which should be rejected, but it has issues. That is a final court of appeal in Jamaica. He was saying to populate an apex court, final court, from such a small pool of talent as we have, especially that being at the expense of the appeal court, there would be an exposure of a limited jurisprudence. And he feels like the CCJ and the Privy Council actually have a larger pool of cases. He emphasised the need to untighten this constitutional belt, right, of Section 49. And that actually could be accomplished by lifting out the entire subsection 2. And he ended on what he described as a disappointing note. He basically said constitutional reform, 30 years, over the last 30 years, and he's fearful that the reform won't take place in this lifetime, in his lifetime, right? And then Brethren pretty much dropped the mic and done. I mean, it was kind of emotional, actually. You could really feel his disappointment, you know? But I'm hoping that his fears are misplaced. I really am. So, let's move on to an update to the report of the CRC. Well, it's not, you know, really so much an update. It's just that they have released additional minutes onto the website. So minutes that are now available from the following meetings: April 26, May 1, May 3, May 8, and May 17. Right? So those minutes are now on the Road to Republic website and the Ministry of Legal and Constitutional Affairs website. So turning to the CRC report, we're going to look at a little section that addresses the Constitution. Section 3.1.3 basically says that consistent with the goals of the terms of reference, the CRC recommends that the constitutional reform programme should begin with the Jamaicanization of the Jamaican Constitution by repealing and replacing the present imperial instrument with a Jamaican instrument made by the Parliament and approved by the people of Jamaica in Jamaica. Remembering the Constitution was actually finalised in Britain, right? Section 3.1.4, the CRC recommends that at the same time the government should abolish the monarchy. And it also confirms that Jamaica will still be called Jamaica. There would be no change to the name of the country. Section 3.1.5, consistent with the imperative to Jamaicanize the Constitution, the CRC is firmly of the view that the reformed Constitution must be deeply grounded in the cultural fabric of the nation, ensuring that it resonates with and is accessible to all citizens. It's essential that the Constitution embodies the unique identity, values and aspirations of Jamaica, thus reflecting a truly homegrown document. Central to this endeavour is the understanding that a constitution should be a reflection of the collective will and vision of the people that it serves. The report goes on to talk about the preamble. A preamble is generally recognised as a useful introduction to a constitution, which inspires national pride and unity and contains expressions of lofty aspirations, as well as certain moral codes and declarations of political objectives. This constitution doesn't have a preamble, and what it does is it gives a technical recital of the monarchical authority, the authority of the monarchy. There were 5 proposed preambles in the 1995 report, and then the Constitution report received another 3. So there are 8 that are annexed to this report, right? They weren't able to arrive at a consensus, and they recommended that basically they get a group of experts together to determine the one that should be chosen. So who submitted a preamble? Edward Bohr is the one that I like. This one. He's a poet. He's a scholar. It says, "We, the people of Jamaica, do hereby inscribe and enshrine in this constitution those principles by which we assume our place in the world community of free and self-respecting people. The conviction and pride with which we espouse these principles derive from the knowledge that they have evolved out of a history of endurance, struggle, and sacrifice, which began in bondage and exploitation for the majority of our ancestors, but which saw, in despite of these hardships, the gradual emergence of an independent democratic nation. By this constitution, and believing in the inherent dignity of all persons, we confirm our commitment to those tried and proven principles of democracy, by which the freedom of the individual is guaranteed within the context of the general good, by which all men are considered equal before the law, by which equal opportunity and social justice exists for all, and by which, having regard to our national motto, no one shall be denied these freedoms and rights on the grounds of colour, class, religious belief. By these principles, we seek to promote the well-being, material, moral, and spiritual. We seek to promote the well-being, material, moral, and spiritual of all citizens, and to preserve a nation secure in its commitment to those ideals, which reflect our best common hopes and aspirations, believing in the idea of the brotherhood of all men, and humbly acknowledging the supremacy and beneficence of God." I like that one there. As I said, there were 8 submitted. 1, Edward Bohr. 2, David Corr, lawyer and politician, former Deputy Prime Minister in the Michael Manley administration. Number 3 was by Geoffrey Mordecai, lawyer and racehorse owner. Number 4 was Ryan Peralto, former mayor of Kingston and St Andrew and a former General Secretary of the JLP. Number 5, Philip Sherlock, former Vice-Chancellor of UWE. Number 6, Lloyd Barnett, constitutional law expert. Number 7, Randolph Rossi. Number 8, Marlene Malahoo Fort, the Minister of Constitutional and Legal Affairs. Again, me personally, I like the one by Professor Edward Bohr. While I wouldn't put forward necessarily Philip Sherlock's preamble without some... there are words in there that I think would be great, actually, if they were extracted and submitted as a possible replacement of the motto. And those words are as follows: "From tribulation, the people harvested triumph." Let me know what you think about that. So this section of the report also addresses the national symbols, right? So there is the national flag. The new symbolism as of 1996 is that hardships there are, but the land is green and the sun shineth, is the symbolism of the flag. Black symbolizes the strength and creativity of the Jamaican people. Gold for natural wealth and beauty of sunlight, and green stands for hope and agricultural resources. There's also the coat of arms. The CRC took note, of the various concerns of the coat of arms, and they think it should be examined to, assess a more appropriate form, right? They've actually recommended that the emblems be vested in the state in perpetuity, and the Parliament be empowered to pass laws to regulate their use and guard against their misuse. Other national symbols, of course, there's the national tree, the blue maho. It gives their scientific names and their common names in the reports as well. The national flower, Lignum vitae. National fruit, ackee. National bird, doctor bird, or also known as the swallowtail hummingbird. The national motto, we know. There's also a national pledge, a national song, a national prayer. The report references the inclusion of the Jamaica Independence Act, saying that accordingly the CRC recommends that the United Kingdom Interpretation Act should not be retained, but the relevant and appropriate provisions of the Jamaica Interpretation Act of 1968 be adopted instead. And of course there's our national anthem, right? Jamaica Land We Love. In September 1961, the leading PNP announced a competition to write lyrics for the national anthem, and they received like 100 entries. The anthem is the work of 4 people: the late Reverend Hugh Sherlock, the late Robert Lightbourne, the late Mappletoft Poole, and Mrs. Poole, who is now Mrs. Raymond Lindo. The national anthem Jamaica Land We Love was originally performed at the National Stadium in Kingston on August 6, 1962, during the official independence ceremony. And I'd like to end with the words of the national anthem. Eternal Father, bless our land. Guide us with thy mighty hand. Keep us free from evil powers. Be our light through countless hours. To our leaders, great defender, grant true wisdom from above. Justice, truth be ours forever. Jamaica, land we love. Teach us true respect for all. Stir response to duty's call. Strengthen us, the weak to cherish. Give us wisdom, lest we perish. Knowledge, send us, Heavenly Father. Grant true wisdom from above. Justice, truth, be ours forever. Jamaica, land we love. Jamaica, 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 land we love. I hope you're continuing to enjoy this journey, finding it educational, useful, and looking forward to our continued travels on the road to becoming a republic truly independent and sovereign together. I'm still very confident that the broke down Porsche is gonna get fixed. Nah, give up on that. You can find this podcast on Buzzsprout, Spotify, Podcast Index, Deezer, Podcast Addict, Apple, iHeartRadio, Amazon Music, and soon come on YouTube. If you want to reason about anything or you can't find any of the material I was talking about, you can email me on a taste of JA at outlook.com. So until the next time, thank you for your support. I appreciate it. Please share this podcast with your friends and family. And again, I thank you so much for taking the time to listen. One love.